Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're recapping this week in cannabis news from September 13th to the 19th. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. Then there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes to learn about the evolution of the industry over time, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you're ready. And after finally seeing some green and optimism in the cannabis sector this week, I will let Tim Seymour explain.
House lawmakers introducing a series of drug policy-related amendments to defense legislation, including a new proposal to protect banks that service state legal marijuana businesses. Tim, what's your take on the action today? This certainly doesn't reverse the trend that we've seen this year.
No, it doesn't. It's been painful 3 months or so, or even 6 months for cannabis, which got ahead of itself, I think, as a sector on expectations on what was happening in D.C. The bottom-up's been fantastic, and even the state-by-state addressable market's been growing. So what this news is it's now possible. This was a headline, first of all, the market didn't expect. So when you see the biggest names in the space like GTI, et cetera, rally 5, 6, 7, 8%, it tells you how spring-loaded the sector really is, especially for macro news. But sneaking safe banking into the National Defense Authorization Act is a headline, frankly, that the industry wasn't expecting, and something that would begin very important momentum. It's not the entire answer for, and the Schumer bill that was proposed 3 months ago was too encompassing, too much of a kitchen sink, and frankly, a non-starter. So this is getting back into, hey, let's get some points on the board, get some progress, get FinCEN on board. If you get the banks involved, you're going to be able to get a lot of activity from here. It would be great for the sector, and that's why the sector rallied today. And the fundamentals have been very strong, but the sector is waiting for a macro catalyst. It's very clear, and today tells you that.
Yeah, Grassa?
Yeah, so I agree 100% with Tim. The problem is the timeline for everything that's happening right now in D.C. is kind of tough going into year end. As we just spoke about, you have infrastructure, you have reconciliation, you have funding the government. There's a real chance we see another government shutdown. So saying safe banking, CBD is a dietary supplement, these are all things that are the tailwinds. I think they will eventually happen. The back half of the year, though, seems questionable to me.
So Tim is the good cop bringing the good news, and then this guy obviously just wants to shit on Tim's parade. But regardless, it's good to take both sides in because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. But the good news is that the House Committee on Rules takes up the National Defense Authorization Act on Monday at noon. So that is tomorrow at noon. Safe banking is Amendment 599. Some have been withdrawn already, apparently, and so the outcome likely decides the direction of the cannabis sector for a while, as it has this past week. So we can see this picture here, 599 version 1. It seems like the support is bipartisan, as we have many lawmakers in here, and this is adding Bipartisan Safe Banking Act, which allows state legal cannabis businesses to access the banking system and help improve public safety by reducing the amount of cash at these businesses. So we're essentially just going to have to wait until tomorrow to find out whether this stays in the bill, and if it stays in, that's going to be very positive for cannabis. Main thing to add, though, with Perlmutter being in the Rules Committee, I would be shocked if it doesn't get added, and it also does have bipartisan support, but keep in mind, if Perlmutter is on the Rules Committee, and he's the one that added this in, and it seems to have support from many congressmen and women. So that's really what gives us reason to believe that the amendment will be approved and added into the bill, but we'll have to wait until tomorrow and see. So on Wednesday, I will definitely update and let you all know what happened, but definitely look out for this yourself. If you wanted to find this snippet on your own, you can go to this website, the Committee on Rules. You can grab the link below. If you scroll all the way down to 599, this does have the snippet that I just showed you about safe banking and all of the lawmakers that do support it, as again, it is a bipartisan bill. It's been submitted, just has to be approved. And this is apparently the document that Perlmutter submitted, and I don't know if it's the old Safe Banking Act or the one that they introduced this year, but main thing I would recommend is if that you're interested in this and you have not listened, listen to this U.S. Cannabis Town Hall hosted by Todd Harrison, Brady Cobb, and Jeff Schultz. It's just a very informative episode on what happens if this ends up staying in the NDAA and if it ends up passing. A little bit of history on the NDAA, how it's a bipartisan bill that has to get passed every year, and it's been passed for the last 57 or 58 years. From my understanding, that's what Brady Cobb was saying. So it doesn't seem like a very good political strategy to get in the way of this bill or do anything that would prevent it from passing. But more importantly, I think the biggest fear is that if this does get added in, and then it passes through the House and gets into the Senate, that Schumer could end up taking it out because he wants the CAOA to pass first. Now, that is a thought that could happen, but more importantly, I think Schumer realizes that New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, all of these states that have promised social equity to entrepreneurs affected by the war on drugs, they need functional banking. So this is why I think it's positive that Perlmutter added it in and not Schumer, so then Schumer can sort of just ignore it, allow it to go all the way through, and this is that incremental step that allows all these social equity applicants opportunity in the space. That's the one fear that could end up happening. But needless to say, all this information is great. I would recommend you listen to this if you're invested in cannabis because it's very informative, and we're going to find out tomorrow at noon, so I will follow up on Wednesday about that. But some other updates as to why we saw some green potentially. Quintanilla of Bernstein reported that even without federal legalization, we estimate that the legal U.S. cannabis market could be worth $40 billion by 2026. And just keep in mind, this is $40 billion by 2026, a very conservative estimate in my view, without any sort of federal legalization. I do think we're going to see some form of decriminalization or legalization from now until then, but regardless, that is what spurred this headline. How high could America get? A deep dive into North American cannabis. So again, this does help improve the sentiment, so thank you, Carl Quintanilla, for sharing this. Onto this one from Todd Harrison, who shares a little bit more from Doug Kass, a hedge fund manager that I featured at the end of my Wednesday episode. You can grab the link below, but it's him talking about how he's aggressively buying cannabis because he thinks we've hit the bottom. But I just want to share this as well because he touches on what I just mentioned too. So 3 good listens and reads if you were involved in the cannabis stocks. My old pal CB1 Cap Todd Harrison had a timely U.S. cannabis town hall meeting. That's the one I just mentioned. Here's the link. There's a lot of good value added information here if you have time, particularly with regard to some positive legislative movement in D.C. And then this one down here. One final thing as it relates to Washington, D.C., which is really all the market seems to care about now. Representative Perlmutter is working to attach the SAFE Banking Act to the National Defense Authorization Act, which we've just covered. This will be taken up by the House next week on Monday at 12 p.m. If this can stay in the bill, it's a game changer and something the market was not expecting will likely be a positive shock. The question will be after that, will it stay in through the Senate? For it to be taken out, Schumer and Booker would have to purposely remove it from the act, which seems to coincide with their policy towards cannabis, and they would have to answer a lot of questions on this ahead of the midterms, which they likely do not want to do. So striking out something so overwhelmingly popular, now 90% popular according to some polls, wouldn't likely help their chances next year, but hurts their ability to promote their wider bill, which has no chance of passing, but plays well, I guess. This is what has driven some of the price movements the last couple days. A long way to go, but outside the fundamentals, everything else is just noise. Added his positions are long MJ ETF, MSOs ETF, Tilray, and then short Tilray calls. So that's a good development just to add. It's more conviction, and again, just reiterates what I was mentioning about all those recent points. So this is Dougie Kass, Seabreeze Capital Partners LP, but someone with experience as a hedge fund manager over time, and clearly he's got conviction in this, so there's reason to believe why he might. Worth investigating. Next one from Todd Harrison, providing us with Shooter McGinley at Needham, recaps U.S. cannabis following their most recent conference. Pulled a few snippets for y'all, so thank you, Todd Harrison, for sharing this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to get it. But cannabis conference takeaways, technicals flashing red, fundamentals solid green. Our primary conclusion from this MSO conference is that the fundamental outlook remains outstanding. This is an industry selling a non-cyclical that gets cut off, but not changed. Our view is that valuation reflects future growth expectations, and businesses should ultimately be measured by the cash flow that they generate. MSO revenue growth from 2019 to 2022 is expected to be the highest of any industry in North America, but the companies are valued like no growth cyclicals in the bottom 30% of industries. With MSO trading volume down by 2/3 from earlier this year, it has become more difficult for institutions to enter or exit positions in size. We attribute the volume decline to changing expectations on the pace of federal reform, but mostly due to changes in custody and clearing at a few U.S. banks. And this is the last one. MSOs have been thriving under complex state regulatory framework while constrained by a high cost of capital and exceptionally high effective tax rates. We don't foresee this changing in 2022. By 2025, we expect this industry to generate more than $40 billion in revenue with an economic impact of greater than $100 billion that will employ over 500 million people. And so while it is difficult to predict when congressional intransigence will convert to progress in the form of material reform at the federal level, as the industry enters this next stage of growth with more states converting to adult use, we think it probable that the call option like returned is exercised. Now they're talking about fundamentals being solid, but not much movement at the federal level. While it's possible that this posting was before the development of the safe being added into the NDAA. So regardless, this just highlights what's important, that the fundamentals are good and that in time the valuations will follow. And we've got another one from AGB on US cannabis. So thank you again, Todd Harrison, for sharing this. The moat will only keep getting bigger for MSOs and US operators. As written in our MSO malaise note this summer, valuations of US operators remain attractive in our view, with the pullback continuing from mid-February peak. This has come despite strong Q2 earnings season, as uncertainty around changes to US federal law remains. While the uncertainty about changes to federal laws and MSOs' ability to uplist remains, we reiterate how MSOs are able to continue to build their respective moats in this current environment. We would note valuation levels today are around the same as second half of 2019 on average for MSOs under coverage prior to COVID lows, indicating the market has fully pulled back. The key difference, in our view, is MSO profiles are in a much stronger position today with better profitability, improved balance sheets, lower cost of capital, as well as clear state catalysts, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, and Virginia all to begin adult use sales in the next few years. We believed MSOs were priced at a value then and have an even stronger view today as operators continue to grow and expand their moats, with larger companies being better suited to compete in an eventual federally legal market in our view. Similarly, we believe this provides time for ancillary players to expand their respective moats ahead of increased competition for federal legalization, including stocks currently trading on major exchanges such as yada yada yada, according to AGP. So thank you, Todd Harrison, for sharing that. On to some MSO updates, or at least updates out of states. This comes from the Office of Medical Cannabis Use, looking at the past week, adding 3,376 patients for total qualified patient count of 612,623. And this is in line with the post-summer trend that we see after summer. Typically around 3,000 plus patients are added a week compared to what we were seeing 2,000 plus in the summer. So that's positive to see that that growth is picking up again. If we can see which MSOs opened new dispensaries, Harvest opened one in Kissimmee and Fluent opened one in Fruitland Park. If we scroll down as well, we can see the amount of milligrams of THC sold, milligrams of CBD sold, and ounces of smokable flower sold. So strong sales across the board for all the MSOs with a footprint and fighting for market share in Florida. Move over to TerrAscend. They received the Michigan pre-qualification approval for the acquisition of Gage Cannabis. So they've announced it has received the pre-qualification approval for cultivation, processing, and retail licenses from the state of Michigan's Marijuana Regulatory Agency pursuant to the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. The pre-qualification approval represents TerrAscend's successful completion of the most comprehensive portion of the state's licensing and regulatory approval process. The pre-qualification approval is a key closing condition for TerrAscend's previous announced acquisition of Gage Growth Corp, and the transaction will close as soon as possible after receipt of the applicable shareholder court and other regulatory approvals and satisfaction or waiver of all other conditions in the definitive arranged agreement are met. So positive that TerrAscend is moving forward with that Gage acquisition. On to this news from Air Wellness as they close their acquisition of Garden State Dispensary, announcing that it's closed through a wholly owned subsidiary on the purchase of 100% of the membership interests of GSD New Jersey LLC, one of the 12 existing vertical permit holders in the state of New Jersey, and one of the state's original 6 alternative treatment care centers. So GSD has 3 open dispensaries, the maximum allowed under its permit, at heavily trafficked highway locations throughout the central region of the state, as well as approximately 30,000 square feet of operational cultivation and production facilities. An additional 75,000 square feet of cultivation is under construction. And so the total cost for Air to get into a premium state like New Jersey, total upfront considerations of $101 million USD, includes US $41 million in cash, US $30 million in exchangeable shares, and $30 million in the form of a promissory note. So definitely a lot more expensive than other acquisitions, but that is the cost of getting into these markets with a lot of growth potential. Earnouts based on exceeding revenue target thresholds in 2022 will be capped at a maximum of $97 million and payable in a combination of cash, promissory notes, and exchangeable shares. Including the maximum earnout consideration, the company estimates this represents a forward multiple of approximately 4x anticipated 2022 adjusted EBITDA. I'm sure they're very happy paying that amount considering what they think they'll get in the long run. And then on top of that, we do have Green Thumb Industries breaks ground on former prison site. So this is just a development that they've started construction. Green Thumb Industries is breaking ground on a cultivation center in Warwick, New York, a town 54 miles north of New York City. The location is unique because the site used to be a prison that at one time held people incarcerated for cannabis. GTI's CEO Ben Kovler told the Green Market Report that he appreciates the history of the site and notes the location is key for distribution to New York consumers. He's also pleased with that the town has shown its appreciation for GTI's investment into the facility and the jobs it will bring. So just the main thing to highlight, despite whatever is happening with the share prices, these companies continue to execute, continue to plan, and prepare for the future. That's what's important to look at. This last one, Cantor Fireside Chat with Charles Bachtell, CEO of Cresco Labs. Just wanted to add this because I also missed this this episode, but MJ Stock Trader provides this very good summary, so I want to thank you, MJ Stock Trader, for this. On an expected Q3 slowdown, Charlie talked about it as more about Q2 being stronger than they expected and the Q3 normalizing, not slowing. Expansion, and this is also just with Pablo, who's 420 Odysseus. Yeah, Pablo Zuanek from Cantor. Expansion, expecting to double Florida stores from 8 to 16 in 2021. Maryland deal to close Q4. Licenses for 2 more PA stores. MA, Massachusetts capacity will grow from 18K to 64K. Michigan should see significant revenue in Q4 2021, Q1 2022 from major expansion and wholesale there. M&A, Florida was the last state we had to have, and no buyer's remorse from Origin House deal. On Schumer's legislation, most agree that SAFE has bipartisan support to pass today. More likely than not, something happens. What passes looks more like SAFE. I do agree. Thank you, Charles, for sharing that light. New York, October 2022 adult use sales, the most aggressive, optimistic timeline before the November elections. Most realistic beginning in 2023. Flower and canopy cap to be determined. Florida, we are not lagging or behind a schedule, working through existing plans. You'll see a lot more from us in the next 24 months. Eventually, you'll have wholesale, and they already have home delivery. Retail saturation is not a concern. Well, he adds, we have plenty of opportunity in our existing markets. Don't want to overpay to get into the state, and I think he's talking about New Jersey. Oh yeah, New Jersey here. We have opportunity to go deeper in our current markets, and I just think you can't get into every market. They're in New York, which is going to be a big one in time, and they're, solidified in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and building a big presence in Michigan, where they can do a lot of wholesale, and other key states. So them not in New Jersey isn't a big worry for me as a Cresco investor, but again, just good to have him add light to that, and as to why. Pennsylvania, I have zero concern about PA, and it's dangerous to worry about month-to-month sales. It's one of our favorite states. I'm also bullish on PA moving to adult use in the near term. I would love that. And lastly, buying back stock, an issue most of us shareholders would love them to consider. We've seen darker days in years past, and something we look at, but you have to evaluate your use of capital. Doesn't sound like he's considering it this time. So very good run through though for anyone that's interested in Cresco Labs or Cresco Labs shareholder. So thank you, MJ Stock Trader, for sharing that. Some other articles, miscellaneous ones: Wall Street Journal, Sha'Carri Richardson effect anti-doping authority to re-examine cannabis. Now, it's more complicated than saying the Sha'Carri Richardson effect, because this has been a battle for decades going on to finally get these organizations to change their views on cannabis and become a little more progressive. Now, I do not have a subscription, so I can't read this whole article, but basically just to highlight that the anti-doping agency, though, is going to re-examine cannabis. That's a positive. As finally, an advisory group will reconsider the substance's presence on the World Anti-Doping Agency's prohibited list. So that's very positive to hear. Out of Marijuana Moment, we've got Missouri spending millions on medical cannabis tax revenue to support veterans programs. Seems like any state that legalizes for cannabis, whether for medical or adult use, will be able to help out their veterans in a way they should have been doing it after Vietnam in the 70s. Missouri officials on Thursday announced that they have transferred millions of dollars in medical cannabis tax revenue to support programs for military veterans. This is the second round of cannabis funding for the Missouri Veterans Commission, MVC, raising the total to $6.8 million. Overall, the state has seen more than $113 million in medical cannabis sales since dispensaries opened in October 2020, enabling regulators to make the significant transfers. Patients are being served by more than 140 dispensary facilities in Missouri now, and we are very pleased to see their sales revenue where it is. Lyndall Fraker, the medical cannabis director of the Department of Health and Senior Services, said in a press release, "Ultimately, this is how we are able to provide much-needed funding for our Veterans Commission." And as you can see, the increase of sales from cannabis dispensaries over time in Missouri, you best believe any state that's going to legalize for medical and then for adult use is going to see this sales growth and trajectory as well. So great update, Missouri. Proud of you. On to news from Canada. Thank you, MJ Bizdaily, for providing this. As Canada's biggest cannabis market, Ontario, the province that I live in, not state, reaches 1,000 legal stores. And the country's biggest market, with a population of nearly 14.8 million people that's needed stores for a long time and were lacking, now it has at least 1,000 licensed cannabis stores. And the 1,000-store milestone marks a period of rapid market growth in the Ontario market, which initially suffered from slow cannabis retail rollout that led to an early deficiency in legal retail outlets and correspondingly low sales. I think the biggest thing to add, legal cannabis retailers in Ontario sold 120 million Canadian dollars worth of cannabis in June, growing 8% over May on an unadjusted basis, according to data from StatsCan. as Ontario's June cannabis sales comprised 37.7% of all Canadian regulated cannabis sales that month. So I've been harping on this for a while, but it just goes to show that the more retail stores you open, the more market share you can take out of the black market and bring into the legal market. And obviously more stores equals more sales, equals more money for investors that choose the right companies and hold long over time. So next one, while ALM, which stands for Asset Liability Management, announces new cannabis certification for insurers. And they probably wouldn't be announcing this if they didn't have reason to believe there's some sort of banking reform coming that's going to open up this industry to insurers, bankers, and all the other industries involved in financial services and asset and liability management. As the national underwriter company, an ALM business is launching one of the first certifications for insurance agents and brokers, risk managers, and other professionals who advise cannabis-related businesses, the Cannabis Insurance Coverage Specialist, CICS. Created with the learning needs of insurance producers, agents, risk managers, and those in various areas of the cannabis business in mind, CICS is the most complete professional learning program available for industry professionals seeking to master the complex and ever-evolving subject of cannabis insurance coverage. The program was created by ALM's subject matter experts and thought leaders in conjunction with multiple insurance, legal, and cannabis industry experts, likely because they believe reform is coming, incremental reform more likely than all-out reform at once. So that's very positive to highlight. While in Italy, the Italian referendum to legalize cannabis is on track to meet its deadline, which is very positive. Just want to add from here, a referendum in Italy to decriminalize cannabis is on track to meet the 500,000 signatures it needs to be considered by lawmakers prior to the September 30th deadline. Euractiv reports. If approved, Italy would become just the fourth European Union member state to pass the reforms, joining Portugal, which has decriminalized all drugs, and Czech Republic and Estonia. While the referendum has already garnered more than 420,000 signatures, the perfect number, in just 4 days, so clearly cannabis decriminalization is popular. Under Italian law, possession of personal amounts of cannabis is punishable with the suspension of one's driver's license, while cannabis sales are met with just 2 to 6 months of incarceration. So this is huge progress. Keep it going, Italy. We'd love to see this happen, and then for other European states to follow. Well, we've got a few more podcasts just to recommend if you're interested and want to develop your knowledge base and your understanding and educate yourself. These are worth tuning into. So we've got a number, and so we've got another great episode from the Cannabis Investing Network. This one, Understanding California, featuring Hirsch Jane of Ananda Strategy. It's just very informative on helping break down and explain the California market better, as it's the biggest market in the world and one that most people don't understand. Taught me a lot, especially adding that very few counties actually allow legal cannabis dispensaries, whereas the majority don't. And that is changing as part of the efforts of the combined agency in California and their effort to bring more small growers or small illicit growers into the legal market. So this is a good episode. Obviously, if you want to add to your knowledge and understanding, though, check this one out for sure. But more importantly, this is a very good little clip that I'm just going to end up playing from a podcast called On the Tape with Danny Moses, Guy Adami, and Dan Nathan. If you don't know who Danny Moses is, he is one of the characters in the movie The Big Short that highlighted the few investors that saw the 2008 financial collapse coming ahead of time, and they decided to short the market. And so if you've seen that movie, which I obviously recommend you do, this guy plays Danny Moses. And so just another good scene to pick at. This here is actually the real Danny Moses. So that's who he's supposed to represent. So anyways, Danny Moses clearly is an investor with experience, and if he was someone that could see the big short coming, he also happens to coin the term the big long, which is cannabis and the future ahead of us. So just going to play this clip anyways, because he's just going to highlight sort of what I talked about in this clip and all of this development that is to come on Monday at 12, which we're waiting out for. But I'm just going to let him talk.
And let me just set the stage for what Brady's going to talk about. So there's an annual bill. It's called the National Defense Authorization Act. Every year it gets reauthorized. Trump tried to block it last year. He vetoed it because they didn't have enough money for the border wall, but it passed anyway by unanimous in the Senate and the House. It's run by the Senate Armed Services Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, and it's been around since 1961. It's the one thing that always gets done. And every year, people attach various things to it because it's a slam dunk. And if you can get legislation attached to it, it's a slam dunk that it's going to go through. So with that setting the stage, Brady, I think we talked last week on this podcast, one of the reasons cannabis stocks have been hit recently, and we've seen gains in the last couple of days, and this is probably why, was that the movement in Washington has stopped. And as it relates to the SAFE Act and everything, it lost its momentum. So I now turn it over to you to set the stage. Tell us what is going on within the SAFE Act and what it's being attached to. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And so that is it. Just going to highlight that because obviously you can grab the link below to listen to it, but I don't want to play the whole thing and just steal their content. You should go listen to their podcast. But notice his emphasis on the NDAA as a bipartisan slam dunk, because SAFE is bipartisan, so Perlmutter can slide SAFE in where it'll likely get approved, because this does obviously benefit many industries, not just the cannabis industry, but the banking industries, the insurance industries as well, everyone involved in money and asset liability management. At the same time, this is how Booker and Schumer can focus on the CAOA, but also provide the benefits to their constituents in New York and New Jersey and all the social equity applicants, the ability to get the opportunity to join the industry much like all the other MSOs. So they can do that, plus they can work on some form of CAOA that allows for decriminalization or federal legalization that can get the votes by 2022. So I see this as the best case scenario. Obviously, we're just going to have to wait, though, until tomorrow to see what happens. It makes me optimistic, though, so hope for the best. Fingers crossed that we get the news that we need tomorrow. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or concerns. But I think we are at a very big turning point for the cannabis industry, and it's just a matter of waiting till tomorrow to find out. So I will be back on Wednesday for an update. But if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. Subscribe if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I'll catch you on Wednesday for midweek update. Have a great weekend, everybody.